Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Payment Association webinar on alternative payments. Where will we stand in 10 years? My name is Antonia Kahinde, and I'm the content lead at the Payments Association. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so that you know how to participate in today's webinar. You will have the opportunity to submit questions to all the speakers today by typing your questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the session, and we will try to address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's panel discussion. You may ask your questions anonymously if you don't want your name attached to your questions. If you have any logistical questions or technical issues, feel free to send a message through the chat box to Emily Beard from the Payments Association, who will be on hand to answer your queries. So without further delay, let's kick off the session. I would like to now introduce Laura McCracken, MD of Commerce and Payments at Accenture, who will lead today's webinar. Laura will kick off the session today with an introduction, and then we'll move on to the panel discussion. Over to you, Laura.
Hi there. It's great to be with you guys on Thanksgiving Day. So excited. I'm actually cooking as we speak, but I'm going to spend the next 90 minutes with you guys and with a wonderful, wonderful panel of experts in payments area. So today we're talking about the art of the possible. We're talking about what's going to happen in 10 years time. What kind of alternative payment methods are going to show up? And I remember I've been in payments for 30 years, and I remember when we used to think that payment innovations were different types of credit cards. Does the card have a chip? Does it have a PIN? Does it have a logo? Does it have a co-brand? But now things have really gotten much more exciting. So the things that are happening in payments today are just incredible. So I'd like to start by just introducing the panel. Let's start with Marcos. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Laura. Hi, everybody. My name is Marcos Zahariadis. I'm a professor and chair in financial technology at the University of Manchester. So I hold the chair of FinTech Alliance Manchester Business School. And as I will also discuss after Laura, my key specialization is around the economics, governance, and management of payment infrastructures.
Thank you, Marcos. And next, Voltec.
Hello, my name is Wojciech Paprota. I'm a founder and CEO of Walkmore, and we are dealing with payment implants, which is certainly a new way of payments.
Thank you, Voltec. And Andre.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Andre. I'm in charge of the payments at Elli, which is a brand of Volkswagen Group, the second largest manufacturer of cars in the world. And Elli is in charge of all electric stuff around the group, but plus also outside of our brands like Skoda, Audi, Seat, and Cupra, and Volkswagen himself.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. And last but not least, Stephen.
Morning, everyone. I'm Steve Northam. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Biotech, also an academic part-time, and the company is involved with the development R&D of our human microchip implants. So lots of exciting stuff to come.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. All right. So this is the way today's going to go down. You've met the panel, and I think you're going to get to know them a lot more during the course of the discussion. I'm going to start off with a little two slides about the evolution of commerce and payments. And then we will move over to the keynote speech by Professor Marcos Zahariadis. And then we're going to have a spotlight session from each of our panelists, including Voltec, Andre, and Stephen. And then we'll have the panel discussion with questions that we've thought about a little bit in advance, but mostly we want to hear from you guys. I look forward to seeing lots of questions in the Q&A. So if you want to move to the next slide, Emily. Okay, just to give you a little bit more, I didn't really introduce myself, so I guess I should do that. So I am Laura McCracken. I'm the global lead for commerce and payments at Accenture. And I have been in payments for all my life, but in very different guys, is I started my career with American Express, where I spent about 10 years there. I moved into consulting, then went into Amazon doing payments within Amazon, and then Facebook, where I did P2P payments, P2M payments, trying to light up social commerce within Facebook and its suite of apps or family of apps. And then lastly, for my sins, I was with Wirecard and working with all of the different fintechs. So there was a really good part of that business, which was really launching fintechs around the world. And I was leading that for about 6 months before the bottom fell out. So that's kind of my background, and that kind of gives me, I guess, I look at things from a different angles, both from the issuing side, the acquiring side, the e-money license and the licensing side, and also from the retail and social side. And one thing I've noticed that we do a lot in payments, we fall in love with our technology. We talk about what we've developed, but we sometimes forget to think about the why. And so that's why I kind of just wanted to walk through today a little bit about commerce, kind of taking us back away from payments for a second to think about the customer, their journey, how their buying behaviors have changed over the years, the new technologies that have launched on that side, and how payments is really fitting into that commerce landscape. So thinking at the beginning, and it's not that we don't stop innovating in any one of the different areas, but starting with bricks and mortar retail, in the past, we used to use cash. We did layaway plans. The big innovation was credit cards, charge cards, moving into debit, scared everyone in the payments industry thinking the sky was falling. But now we're getting much more innovative on that front as well with contactless and just walk out technology. And one thing we'll learn about a little bit later today is you as a payment with chips and facial recognition and other things. Then we moved into e-commerce and in-commerce in, I guess it was, when was it? 2004 with Amazon. Sorry, 1994 with Amazon, get my decades. And that's when you had to come up with new payment solutions like PayPal, really making sure that people wouldn't adopt e-commerce if it wasn't really slick. And that's why Amazon really recognized that you've got to get payments right. Because if you don't get payments right, you're just not going to get your customer. So they developed that one-click technology that they really, they work with the regulators very closely to preserve that, despite things like SCA and other things that come along. Digital wallets, buy now, pay later is on the scene. Then next came along marketplaces and platforms. And this kind of changed the game again, because when you have the likes of Alibaba, where they own no inventory, they have no warehouses, they are simply a marketplace for other sellers. They had to become really good at marketplace payments and being able to pay out, develop the alternative payment methods such as Alipay. So Alipay supported Alibaba and allowed that business to thrive. And Jack Ma today will talk about how Alipay has always been the secret sauce, the secret weapon within the Alibaba group, even though it's standalone separate now. And then you look at things like Uber really brought to us invisible payments. We don't even think about it anymore when we get out of an Uber, it's done. Airbnb, you have to get verified as a host or as a guest. Your identity has to be checked. You have to make sure that you've got payment acceptance and payouts as well there. So marketplace payments just brought a whole new level of complexity. Now we're moving into the future. So social media, social commerce. Again, this is my world. I spend my life trying to light up social commerce on the platforms like Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. And now you guys have read the news about Twitter, what Elon Musk is planning to do, and Pinterest and TikTok. And this is a whole new way of customers wanting to buy, not just buying from brands, not just buying from marketplaces, but buying from each other. Because through social commerce, you've got all these people kind of coming in, anyone can become a creator, anyone can become an influencer, anyone can become a seller. really, quite easily on these platforms. So now we need payments, and we need to challenge everybody on the call to try to find a solution to make it really seamless and help the customers, help us, the people, to trust in that system. Because if you don't, you're not going to embrace social commerce in the West the way that they have in the East if you don't trust that your payment details are going to be safe and do what you want them to do, and that you're going to get your deliveries the way you expect. And that is then moving into the next area. So once you get social commerce going, and I should say that the big examples are really out of Asia. You get into the super app territory like WeChat and Alipay, and those are the two big famous super apps in China. But now you've got new super apps emerging like Grab and Gojek, Paytm, there are probably about 10 big super apps in Asia. And the way I'll go over in a second what the definition of a super app is, because people seem to be interested in it now that Elon Musk is threatening to become a super app in the West. But that's a new way of transacting, and where it's all in one. You've got kind of one app that includes your payment method, your social network, and commerce. And last but not least, you've got the metaverse and NFTs, and that's where there's really a convergence, and digital identity takes on a new shape. I mean, in order for any of these things to be successful, we've got to crack the code on digital identity. I believe that it's in the West, we're probably going to see super apps come from the likes of the wallet, because we tend to have more trust in our, there's a regulated, so if you can pair digital identity with the wallet, then you can actually, instead of having embedded finance that we always talk about, we can have embedded commerce, and you can start layering commerce on top of your wallet. And then moving into the metaverse, you've got things like the Bored Ape Yacht Club. I haven't yet bought a Bored Ape, but I find that fascinating that you've got a real convergence between digital art and payment and currency, because basically that Bored Ape that you buy for X number of Ethereum, that is actually currency in and of itself and can be traded. And so that's something that is really on the horizon. I think we're all moving that direction. And obviously that's why Zuck changed his name from Facebook to Meta, to try and ride this wave. So that's it. If you want to move to the next slide, Emily, I'll just give a quick overview of super apps, because I spent a lot of, everyone's talking to me about this, how can we become a super app? And everyone is talking, like social media companies, fintech companies, commerce companies, transportation companies are all thinking about how they evolve their services and solutions so they can hold that title in the West. If you talk to the likes of Revolut and Klarna, Block, PayPal, they would tell you that they already are a super app. I might argue that and say that they have a little ways to go, but they do have the mobile wallet, and they are layering on top of that commerce. And they do have that kind of one app, one sign in, one user experience. But what they need to do to take it to the next level is add in some social elements so that you can connect users with merchants or creators or each other, etc. And then so you need to add that from the mobile wallet, add the chat, then add some the network so that you can have the economies of scale. And last but not least, add on bits of commerce. And it doesn't have to be everything. It could be just a niche super app. You could just have a travel super app, or a fashion super app, or a dating super app. So there are a lot of different ways in which this could show up in the future. So that's it for me. And I think I've done my 10 minutes, and I will hand it over to our keynote speaker, Professor Marcos Zachariadis.
Thank you, Laura. That was very interesting. Hello, everybody. I'm going to take a slightly different approach to payments. And just to give you a bit of background, being an academic, have been studying payment infrastructures and payments, including international payments, cross-border value transfer systems, and so on and so forth for several years. Eventually, I studied my PhD back in the day, 2006, at the London School of Economics, where essentially I was looking, at a lot of these questions that you see on your screen right now. So early questions that were really concerned into, emerging from the payment literature, for example, is how does money move, across borders? How does money move across economies, entities in an economy? What are the infrastructures that essentially we use, the value transfer systems, as we call it sometimes, that facilitate, the modern economy, transactions in the modern economies, right? And in principle, how do these infrastructures come about, right? So what are the key things that we can identify as elements of these infrastructures that we have seen and we use, day in and day out today, but also, looking forward, what are the elements and key issues and debates we need to identify as we're trying to build new infrastructures. A lot of them that Laura kind of spoke about. Of course, they're at the kind of user experience layer, but also all the elements that sit below the user experience, right? All these modules that when they come together, they facilitate that transactional element. For example, things like the standards, data standards and in terms of interface standards, or the different technologies that we use, to maintain and put forward these infrastructures. What is their architecture, right? What is the community behind that builds these infrastructures, and what are the rules around governance, right? Who controls these infrastructures? Who has the right to edit them? To do not just make changes, but also propose and suggest ways forward, so that there is continuous development and emergence of new innovations, on top of these perhaps infrastructures or as part of these infrastructures. And last but not least, of course, issues around security, privacy. So all of that kind of boils down to how existing infrastructures actually exist, right? How do they come about? But also going forward, how do we build new infrastructures, new rails in the economy? But another very important question we've been asking, as an academic in this space, is also what is the economic impact of these infrastructures, right? Who benefits in the end of the day? And if, of course, it's beneficial to consumers, is it sustainable for the businesses that participate, either as modules of one part of building this infrastructure, or perhaps even if it's a more integrated system, that benefit from this operation? What are the economic incentives in that context? And these are quite important questions, because when we're thinking about new kind of payment rails, new ways of transacting in a more digital economy this day and age, we sometimes forget about all these questions. And it's clear to us, having been an observant, let's say, of payment systems developments over the years, these questions come back again and again and again. Every single payment initiative that you see going forward, will have to deal with that question. With all these questions, and if they don't, essentially that's where more trouble is being created. And just to give you an example, we talk a lot about open finance, and of course, open finance is not necessarily payment infrastructure per se, but it does facilitate this new idea of account-to-account payments. It's kind of seen as a new rail in many kind of different economies these days that promote these kind of open finance regulations. Starting from open banking, of course, and following through to opening up more data. And so when you think about open banking, for example, through PSD2 and the payment initiation process as a different kind of rail, let's say, of processing payments in the economy, which is more digitally native and takes advantage of more data. Again, you need to think about all these questions. You need to solve questions about, for example, how much data you open. How do you engage in competition through data openness? Solve issues around this identification of the third parties potentially that tap onto this new rail, and take advantage of kind of these payment initiation processes. But within that, again, issues around standards in terms of the API, how these can be adopted more widely, and what are the initiatives to promote this kind of new standardization that we see at that layer of the interface. And again, go back to the previous questions, things around security, data standards themselves, right? Not just the standards of the APIs, but the actual standards of the data that are being, the travel, across these rails. And also, things around interoperability. How does this new rail tap onto or sit on the side of, existing payment systems, the existing kind of payment or value transfer systems that we have in the economy as alternative kind of payment rails, right? Now, all these questions, and here's an example of a study that we did around open finance, how to put forward open finance frameworks. It's a study that we did in the Canadian context. All these questions, anybody who wants to build a new payment rail, for example, will need to deal with. But there's one more fundamental question that I also addressed a bit before, and I'm going to bring down the context of open finance as well, as to what are some of the business models that when you put forward a new kind of payment rail, a new way of making payments, for example, what are some of the business models that would make these new propositions sustainable? And we have seen, transition going from, more integrated value propositions that we typically had at the bank level, who were keen to facilitate everything themselves, to the emergence of new business models like platform business models, or creating ecosystems that will then rebundle services and become perhaps, the super apps, or different kinds of ecosystems that bring value in the eyes of the consumers, for example. And this is where we think about potentially new ways of creating value for customers, but also the new identity of financial services, institutions going forward. And and this is something that its existing player would need to see what is their position in this new kind of ecosystem that is being proposed. And the reason they need to do that is also that generally we see the entire ecosystem in financial services, all the different kind of modules that play a role, for example, either as part of a general kind of financial service proposition, or more specifically a payment, for example. These are becoming more and more modular. I'm just going to borrow a slide here from one of the publications that is forthcoming, that we have in a top journal that will be available early next year, hopefully. Is that we have seen these transition from more vertically integrated systems into more kind of a distributed systems, or more modular. Perhaps modular is a better word to describe this, but more modular kind of architectures in financial services, where you have different elements, different modules that sit at different parts of the overall kind of value chains that we have in finance, which obviously can be a payment in it and of itself, that play a role in order to deliver a service in the end to the end customer. And so it's really important to see, as we're thinking about how payment systems transform, how the payment process actually being realized and being delivered to the end customer, where as an institution, for example, in financial services, where do you sit in this architecture, and what is the value you bring into that kind of more modular, let's say, arrangement of these new value chains that are being created in finance. And a key reason that you also need to do that is also to understand, let's say, if you have a better understanding of your value chain, then you're able to interrogate and dissect this process more productively, so that you identify particular bottlenecks as you kind of seek to collaborate and or tap into existing ecosystems or value that deliver, for example, payments in the industry. And this idea of innovation bottleneck is very prominent in the innovation management literature. This is also something that we've been doing a lot of research around, for example, these new value chains that emerge in finance, be it to process payments, or perhaps some other banking service, or financial service, for example. And having greater visibility about your value chain and appreciating, assessing these kind of bottlenecks and how critical they are, how risky they are, will also give you an opportunity to create these integrations and relationships more strategically, develop your ecosystem in a more productive way, so that you can bring kind of more value to your end customer going forward. Now, all these relate, for any rail, and I just gave the example here of open finance, obviously, as a new idea of putting forward kind of new value transfer infrastructures. But again, the same questions you need to study, in any kind of a new rail that you put forward. For example, the cryptocurrencies, they can also be seen as a value transfer infrastructure. I mean, we know that obviously they propose a new token, but if you look at blockchain solutions, especially in the early days, like for example, Bitcoin, this is a fully integrated payment system with a token. And so thinking, through all these questions is something that people didn't do in the early days. We published a paper 3 years ago around the governance of blockchain infrastructures, which also had the chance to present at the UK Parliament. But it's a key question to understand governance issues and how these value chains potentially kind of work in any kind of value transfer system. And this also goes for more contemporary approaches, like for example, CBDCs, right? So what will be your architecture in the end of the day? What will be the new value chain, and where are the different entities that you want to encourage, perhaps completely new entities that will want to contribute into this new ecosystem or innovation space that can be developed on top of it, or as part of this kind of new payment proposition, new payment infrastructure. So that's going to be influenced directly on how you design the system. And this will have consequently, essentially the major impact on how end consumers will consume value or will realize value, right? So are you putting forward a system that would be more reliable than existing system, will be more resilient, more scalable, more secure? Are you putting forward a system that will be faster, more inclusive, more user-friendly, more transparent, or perhaps more open to competition, or they will have the ability to be extended, right? So what are the end benefits that consumers will be able to consume, and how these are different from existing infrastructures, and how these are directly impacted from the architecture and the new value chains that you'll build, as part of this new value transfer system. They're all interlinked, and I think they need to be more rigorously kind of interrogated
Marcus,
before we go forward and propose something.
Marcus, sorry that I interrupt you, but do you need to present something because of nothing is showing and the audience is asking about your slides?
Oh, right. Okay. Sorry, I should have. I didn't manage to share my screen. That's a shame. Yes, I do have a set of slides which I'm more than happy to share afterwards, but yes, let's do that after, because I just finished my presentation and I think I was the only one that was looking at it. That should have been flagged up a bit earlier. Apologies, because you guys knew that I had some slides, so the fact that these were not presented. Yeah. Okay. So this is my presentation.
You can back up a little bit, where if you like.
Well, it's my fault that I didn't share. It would have been better if I was prompted that I was not sharing.
Oh, that's okay.
That's fine.
You know what, Marcus, you did such a great job anyway. Just we were riveted with all the questions, and you were, as you're going through the questions, you had my imagination going, and I think that you had other people's imagination going as well. Having said that,
that's fine.
But it would still be good to go back through it. It'd be nice to see a little bit, and you might add some additional commentary through your slides.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just jump to a couple of them so I don't have to run through everything. So yeah, this is the point I made about modularity. I think, what's quite interesting, I think, is that, there's an emerging trend, obviously, adopting APIs across, financial services, not just the regulated APIs, right? But this idea of having interlinked systems different modules are part of new value chains that talk to one another. And I think that has major implications of how to design new value propositions in finance. And the key point here is that, of course, partially that could be part of a payment, process, for example, payment initiation from a third party, but also different elements that will need to be, part of a payment service, like even fraud detection or risk analysis or payment processing, or some kind of API gateway that enables a third party to initiate a payment, outside perhaps where the actual deposits will sit. So this kind of modularity, I think, kind of brings greater complexity and, of course, greater risks. So it's being part of being a module, within these kind of new value chains that we see in payments. You really need to identify your innovation bottlenecks, what we call upstream and downstream. And in terms of, where you sit in the value chain, you need to have a better visibility of these integrations. But I think the same kind of applies pretty much for everything. And my point was around CBDCs, because the architecture you will choose to put forward a new payment rail, which essentially CBDCs, is a new payment rail of some sort, right? That will, allow you, or you'd have to ask again all these questions about governance, standards, integration, data formats and protocols you follow, security, privacy issues, right? So all these questions that fundamentally go back to the beginning of my presentation that we've been asking and doing research, all these years, from ATM infrastructures to SWIFT infrastructures to card infrastructures, to international to other sorts of international payment infrastructures, to even more modern infrastructures as part of a payment journey or process, within the PSD2 kind of, let's say, ecosystem, or a CBDC infrastructure. You'd really need to go back to the basics, interrogate the system, and that's what will enable you to understand better whether you're bringing more value to the end consumer. So I think that's in a snapshot what I've been talking about. And sorry I didn't share my slides. I'd be more than happy to, of course, make them available afterwards if anybody's interested. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Before we jump over to our next spotlight, could you just share a little bit about your thoughts on striking the right balance between the different stakeholders? So when you think about something like the need to regulate and protect people's data versus the customer's need to have convenient, fast, free, frictionless payments. What do you think about that? How do you strike the right balance between the different stakeholders?
Yeah, I think there needs to be a discussion around who is. You mean different stakeholders in terms of the different kind of organizations or institutions or firms that bring some input to this kind of payment process, you mean?
Yeah, the different needs in terms of just think regulation versus customer experience. They're both very important. You have the retailers always asking, trying to make things slick and easy. Like I talked about the Amazon wanting to have a one-click checkout, but we of course need to keep people safe. So we implement SCA, okay. Also GDPR, trying to protect people's privacy. So we're always clicking on those little buttons about accepting cookies or deleting cookies. So where do you strike the right balance? How do you think about that?
Okay, I see your point. Thanks, Laura. So I think it's important to encourage innovation, like in general terms. I think innovation is important to whoever it comes from in terms of payments, right? Be it Twitter and Elon Musk's kind of ambitions around building a super app or not, or just a very sleek payment proposition, for example. And this is welcome. We have seen a lot of the big techs kind of entering this space, and I think they do bring a lot of efficiencies to people. But there is issues that could emerge potentially, from them becoming dominant. I mean, you don't want, in general terms, and if you look at economic theory, in terms of competition economics, for example, you don't want one firm to be dominating an industry, because then you end up with symmetries in terms of power, and that could result into imposing their own terms to consumers, which in the long term it's not good, right? So you need to encourage more competition, and to do that, I think regulation plays a significant role here. So regulators really need to pay attention and try and look forward in the future. What are the benefits that, of course, consumers would be kind of enjoying from these new innovations, but also what are some of the risks that these could carry on forward, as the system becomes more and more dominant, right? Yeah, and there's a lot of examples, even today, having these like Visa, MasterCard, for example, kind of dominating the payment space across Europe. I'm sure this is something that, regulators, all these years, these tremendous benefits, but regulators now see it, as anti-competitive in some ways, right? So you need to encourage more ways where people can pay, with less friction, more digitally native, perhaps, with less fees, more flexibility, more programmability, and so on and so forth. So, so you always want to be able to encourage more innovation. I think, this is, competition and innovation versus stability and security. These are very, key debates and difficult debates that regulators need to have with industry. Right? Yeah.
Very good. I have one question that I'd like to address that was put in the Q&A. This is a good one. You talked about interoperability, and one of our viewers is asking about PICs. Like, how do you encourage UK and European companies to accept payment methods like in LATAM, such as PICs, in order to collaborate globally?
I'm not familiar with the PICs, to be honest, but
let's make it closer to home. Just thinking interoperability between across borders. It's complicated enough across Europe, but then imagine getting from Europe onto Brazil.
Yeah, I think, international payments, they're quite a special case, because you need that corresponding banking model to be in place in order to be able to facilitate, some of these journals or kind of international corridors in terms of value transfer, exchange between different currencies. I mean, we have seen some very interesting kind of business models being developed, from companies like Wise and others who do a lot of work in international payments. But these are kind of more leveraging kind of this closed system kind of approach, where currency exchange happens internally for the most part, and these are quite successful for very busy corridors, let's say, between countries that have particular kind of volumes of transfers. But going forward, I think the key thing with CBDCs in putting forward new value propositions will be also how these are manifested in the international payments context. And I think their interoperability will play a much more important role than interoperability today for international payments, right? So building CBDC infrastructures, and going forward, I think they need to build interoperability by design into these new value propositions, so that we don't end having the same problems as we did like 40, 50 years ago, when we had to find an external solution like a SWIFT infrastructure to be able to process international payments, right? So if you design that before you release, with interoperability, international payment interoperability in mind, before you release a new infrastructure, I think that's going to go a long way in terms of delivering benefits in the future. And I think there is initiatives. So if you look at the Bridge and other kind of initiatives that the Bank of International Settlements with different communities and central banks across the world discuss, they're all pointing to that idea of being kind of making international payments more interoperable, and that's also going to be key on creating kind of more ecosystems around value consistency for consumers, like how third parties, new value propositions, new ideas will tap onto this infrastructure more seamlessly, right?
Yeah, absolutely, great. Yeah, you conquered a couple more questions on the list. Excellent. But we're right on time to go to our next spotlight. So we're going to answer a lot of more of these questions when we come to the panel discussion later. But I'd like to change tack a little bit. So thank you so much, Marcos, for that. And again, sorry for the slides glitch. Thought it was all intentional because you were doing so great. But they look like fascinating slides, so we would love for you to share them with us later. And now we're gonna move over to Stephen. So Stephen is the founder of Biotech, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about a new alternative payment method.
So yeah, as Laura said, introduced me, I am the founder of a company called Biotech, which I started around 7 years ago. So I've been trading.
Stephen, do you want to put on your camera?
It should be on. It's on my
Oh,
end.
okay. I'm sorry. I must be looking at the wrong thing.
Can you see?
Now I'm paranoid now.
You should better see me. I don't have any slides to display either, so it's just me chatting. There's no
Gotcha.
slides. So yeah, Biotech company set up about 7 years ago, predominantly focused on R&D around human microchip implants, which was quite out there, quite different when we first launched this. We had a lot of press, international press around chipping humans. A variety of people doing it around the world, have been for quite some time. And it's been our focus really to use implantable technology for a range of use cases. The current focus for our company is really around assistive technology. So how we can use implantable tech to help disabled people, convenience, change the way people do things. And obviously payments does crop up almost on a daily basis now with inquiries to our company. Can we pay using a microchip implant? Which I'll discuss again shortly as well. But currently we offer RFID, NFC sort of implants, the very basic stuff, very old technology, which I'm sure you're all aware of and how it's used in payments. Very similar to what's used by vets to chip cats and dogs. We've just repurposed that technology and offered it out to have human implants, essentially. So an implant placed in your hand. Currently the use cases are really access control, so entering buildings. We've also developed a range of tech around the ability to scan an NFC implant, which then opens up your contact details, you can share them, opens up your LinkedIn, etc., etc. But again, it's very basic sort of stuff. But it always comes back to, we want to better pay with an implant, Steve. What can we do? Wojtek from Walletmore has sort of cracked this, and he'll explain some of that detail next. But I'll just run through some of the sort of demographics, why people are doing this. Some of the payment issues we've had and discussions with providers as how we could sort of develop this technology. So our end goal really, as with most people in this sort of industry, is the all seeing, all dancing, unique chip, which can be your ID, your payment, your wallet, your keys, etc. And that's moving forward quite rapidly now. And you'll see a variety of people doing work in this arena. Demographics wise, it's generally the Gen Z, the alphas, the 18 to 30 sort of region, the early adopters who are jumping onto this technology. And talking to them, it's generally the convenience. So the ability to not carry a key, they can access a building by swiping their hand. A lot of people approach us because they lose things constantly, lose keys, cards, wallets. How can we have this embedded so we can't lose it? Male and female, big mixture as well. So it's not predominantly focused on a particular gender. But they're all generally currently quite early adopters to tech, but we see that progressing a lot more now. So we've chipped thousands of people essentially now and sold lots of implants for a variety of different reasons. Doing that for several years. So as I said, about 7 years ago, we started this. It's been developing step by step, and we're really focused on developing the technology behind the scenes, even though we do offer the ability to install these implants for people. And then the payment issue crops up over and over again. And obviously you've seen wearables, so you can have rings, bits and pieces you can wear, which allow payments. And then about 4 years ago, we were approached by MasterCard. They said, come in to the head office up in Canary Wharf and have a chat with us, Steve. We've sort of been watching what you've been doing with implants. We're interested in what's going on. Come talk about it. Let's discuss. So just some of the elements which came out of that. There's 4 sort of areas which are current hurdles when it comes to payment-based implantable technology, which I'm sure the audience are probably aware of. One of the biggest hurdles we see currently, I'm sure Wojtek will explain this at Walletmore as well, is public perception around implantable technology. Is divisive, essentially. Lots of people love the idea of having tech embedded in your hand, using it. Lots of people really, really don't like this idea. So we get the big brother, people are tracking me. This is really bad. My answer is, if you're worried about being tracked, ditch your mobile phone, and that's tracking everything you do constantly and broadcasting it. Lots of religious connotations. Again, and lots of people who believe COVID vaccines, the government have microchipped them against their will, all sorts of weird and wacky conspiracy theories now I hear. So for the ability for a big provider, MasterCard, Visa, etc., to jump on board and offer a payment-based implant is still quite divisive for them, quite a concern around the public perception, the brand perception, and so forth. So that's one of the main issues to sort of overcome. The other issue raised was it needs to work absolutely flawlessly every single time. So the providers are concerned around degradation of the silicon, the implant, will it last forever, will it continuously work, etc., etc. It should work in a lifetime, really. It won't degrade. It's a very small device. It's a passive device, doesn't require a power source. Another issue raised was security. So currently, it's more than possible to implant payment-based technology into a hand, into a human, as Wojtek explained with Walletmore. The main issue currently, from our point of view as a business, is that the providers, the MasterCards, the Visas, the Europay of the world, still require any sort of wearable, implantable tech to expire. So if it's your card, a wearable, it's still got to expire 4 to 8 years, and then it's essentially redundant, which I'm not really pushing as an idea to implant something which needs to be removed. Ultimately, you want the implantable to be reprogrammable and reused, etc., etc. But security, obviously, massive concern, and that was one of their main areas. Also, it needs to be really easily injectable. So the implants we provide like a grain of rice, implanted using a needle, very quick, very easy. So making it so you can do that is quite simple, but again, the tech needs to be developed slightly further. Ultimately, it's very easy to do this, and my sort of end goal is really, payments are one thing, but ultimately all we're trying to do is prove you are who you say you are. It's a form of digital ID, and if we can crack it so it's your passport, your card, your identification implanted in your hand. I mean, I say to people, imagine your iPhone 20 years ago, 15 years ago even, imagine 10, 15 years into the future, and the adoption rates we're already seeing with implantable tech. You can look at Neuralink of Elon Musk. This will become more commonplace, I'm more than certain. And ultimately, really, it's just saying, are you exactly who you say you are? And the systems outside of that are out of our control, essentially. It's more what the providers want to produce. The tech is there. It's very straightforward. It's very easy. And ultimately, Speaking X from Walletmore will explain a lot more when it comes to actually doing this. People are using them, implantable tech, for payments. And ultimately, yeah, I love the discussion. I love the debate. It's very divisive. There's lots of ethical concerns, and it opens up lots of questions, lots of research, and hopefully you guys want to chat about it. So I look forward to answering some more of your questions in due course. But yeah, that's a quick rundown of what I do.
One quick question I have to ask you. This is coming from Abdel. He wants to know how many of people at Biotech, including yourself, have an implant.
So I have an implant in my hand. Everyone works for us have implants, and I own a variety of companies. One of them was a very large co-working business, and we offered the ability to have a chip implanted in your hand when you moved into the co-working space, which allows you to access your office, your building. And yeah, lots of people jump on this as an ease, a convenience, a speed. You can't lose your fob, your key, you just swipe your hand. My house is the same technology now. Swipe my hand to open the door. So yeah, lots of people.
Wow, awesome. That's good. That's great. So you eat what you cook.
Exactly. Yeah.
Excellent. Great. So thank you so much. Now we're going to move over to our next spotlight, which is Voltmore, talking about, or I'm sorry, Wojtek talking about Walletmore. So Walletmore. So Wojtek, would you like to give us a quick overview of your company?
Hey, of course, I've been waiting for that since the very beginning of the conference. So let me share the presentation, and please let me know if you see the presentation. So do you see that?
We do.
Yes.
All right,
Yes.
so let's get it started. So as Steven mentioned, the implant is definitely the way forward, and I'm going to show you a little bit more details about it. So when it comes to Walmart, that's the product that we have developed, and it consists of three components. The first and the most important is, of course, the microchip, which is the place where all the data is securely stored. And then there's the NFC antenna, and that's the element that makes it possible for the data to be read. Of course, it's the NFC antenna, which stands for near field communication. And finally, we have the biopolymer, which is super important in all the implantable technologies. The biopolymer is the one that gets in touch with the body, and therefore needs to be fully biocompatible. And biocompatible means that it does not get into the reaction with the human body cells. It's basically neutral. So that's why we can consider it fully biosafe. And we have been developing those implants since 2021. It's basically available on our website. And I'm going to show you how simple is that and how fun it can be to use the implant as a payment device.
Na zakupy,
Here's a customer from Poland that he speaks Polish.
paluszki. Dzień dobry, płatność kartą. Teraz proszę zobaczyć, jak to wygląda.
Nie, no nie wierzę. Naprawdę?
Czekaj, zapłacone już.
Wow!
Actually, that's one of the most common reactions that our customers are getting. It's another one.
It feels like summer. Feels like summer.
And finally, the video from Germany. So I'm sure it's going to be tons of questions at the chat in a few minutes. So let me address the most common cases that we are talking about in terms of security. And you're probably wondering, okay, so is it possible to process the payment without knowing that there is a terminal in your field? And the answer is no, because if you see how the people from all these videos are tapping the payment terminal, you can clearly see that they need to have a very correct placement and they need to find a sweet spot. So, for example, the person from the first video was placing a hand at the very bottom of the NFC reader, and the other two people placed the hand at the very top. And it's related to the fact that implant has a very small antenna. The actual size of an implant is less than 3 centimeters. So if you compare it to the credit card or debit card, it's way larger. And therefore, you need to be very, very precise and tap the exact place where the terminal's antenna is. So if you experience a situation in which there is a random person walking around the tube, supermarket, park, gallery, whatever, with a terminal, you would realize at least 10 times that there is something going wrong with your hand and someone is just touching your hand, trying to find the sweet spot. So it's done on purpose. You need to really put the correct placement to the terminal to make sure that the transaction is processed. So that's the way how our MVP works, but it's just the beginning for our company. Sorry. And that's the vision. That's what we are going to develop. And as we already spoke on this webinar, it's not, when we are talking about payments, it's not only the payments themselves, but it's also the digital identity, and I call it merge of the physical and digital identity. Let's imagine the world where we don't need keys, we don't need cards, whatever it's the card for payments, whatever it's a Walmart loyalty card, transit card, fitness card, the card for car, or even the card to open the office or working space, because everything is locked in your implant and precisely speaking in the cloud-based system, an app that is linked with your implant. So you would, in the future, I believe you would only need this little device linked in the backend with multiple profiles, trusted systems where you have your profile, and then be able to identify yourself and authorize your transaction. Not only transaction, but authorize that you agree to, for example, process payments, or agree to let someone in to access protected to the protected area. So it's all about the integrations and making sure that the big companies, whatever it's the banks, big commerce companies, or even car manufacturers would like to work with us. We see a great move on the market, and we believe that it's going to happen because we already have a number of letter of intents and actually projects going on. And I believe it will take just a couple of years to make it happen. But before we get to this point, we need to put a lot of emphasis on education and knowledge, because when we are talking about such a disruptive innovation, what matters is actually being aware of what it actually is and how it actually works. It's, as Stephen said, it's just the device for near-field communication. It cannot be used for tracking or monitoring, but it's sadly something that not a lot of people know, and that's what we are working on at the moment. So that was my presentation. Thank you very much for listening to that. And of course, feel free to reach out to me by email, phone, or LinkedIn. I will be more than happy to explain more about the company, the devices, if we do not have time to answer all of these questions, because I can see that a lot of people have already posted something. Of course, you can also go to our website and learn more about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll check. One quick question, just to kind of cover off a lot of the questions that I saw about your presentation. Is there more or less risk in terms of identity theft with an implant versus a card?
I believe it's less. Of course, you may assume that there is a situation in which you get your hand cut off, and then the person who does that may use it as a potential tool to identify us if he or she is you. But let's ask ourselves a question. What is the reason for identity theft, assuming that it's the card that acts as this token for authorizing and identifying the user? It's the situation in which you just lose it or get it stolen. And in case of the implant, it's not possible to lose it or get it stolen. So I heard a number of cases of my friends and family members who got their wallets, phones, or cards stolen and ended up being robbed for a certain amount of money in the stores, where you don't need to authorize the decision with the PIN number if the amount is relatively low. So that's the risk that we are addressing, and that's something that cannot happen with the implant. And actually, that's one of the most important values that implants can offer, and that cannot be offered by any other form factor.
Yeah, excellent. I love your comment about merging digital and physical identities, because I can imagine these types of things taking it not only for payments, but also for getting into a bar, your driver's license, everything could be
Exactly.
that one piece of identity that allows you to do everything. It's a super chip.
Yeah, it's not also about the chip, but it's also about the way the systems are being structured and the regulators are structuring it. It's not that common in Europe, but for example, in Korea, the one document that acts as a passport can also act as a, maybe not passport, but national ID, can also act as a payment method, the transit card and business card. So it also depends on the willingness from the public institutions and big corporations to be able to integrate all these access documents into one, let's say, powerful form factor.
Good stuff. Very exciting. Okay, now we're going to turn. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And now we're going to have a different tack again. Andre is going to share with us a little bit about what it looks like when your automobile becomes a payment method. So Andre, over to you.
Yeah, hello guys. I don't. First, let me mention I don't have something to share about in slides, and also let me clear up. We don't sell you the car. So the car you buy at dealer side and you bought at the group side. And when we're talking about in-car payments, we have to talk about with the group. Ellie himself is in charge of all electric vehicle stuff. So if you buy the car, you probably start on our side as a customer to buy the EV charger, the wall box, if you have a house or a flat where you can install that. But in the most sufficient way, you will be our customer if you don't have a house, but you own an electric car, which means you're starting to have the car, you're starting with downloading the app of the brand like Audi, Skoda, Cupra, Seat or Volkswagen, and then you will be our customer. We have a 3-tariff model, which is combined with a 0 subscription model, $5.99 and $12.99, and we are in charge of the whole European region. So in that case, you also have the possibility to join us if you don't buy a car from our brands. If you buy a Ford or Opel, you can be also our customer because of with our brand Ellie, we will dedicated address to the people outside of our universe, which means we cover at the moment 300K charging station across Europe, and you can charge and load and tank your car wherever you want and need. And we are the only person who are taking care of the contract situation with you. So it doesn't count if the charging station is from Shell or Aral or your local electric company. We cover everything, and we will be you, or we are your contract partner, and we charge you in that case. That's everything I have to know about Ellie. And if I see Wojtek and if I see Steve, I totally agree that will be the future. From my point of view, it's not really our customer in that case, because we're starting with the app. You need the app, and in that case, you use some payment methods in the app to charge your car or to capture your amount of volume. Why I definitely see something like this is that we also, of the 300K loading station across Europe, we own 3,000 of them. And based on the typical German word is Ladesäulenverordnung, something which opens next year the way to barrier-free payment on the station. There I definitely see something like this little implant where you come to the loading station, wave your hand in front of the loading station, start your charge your car. That's what I can say and bring onto the table in that case. So I'm from the merchant side. I'm highly interested in what will bring up the future, especially in the payment sector, but also beside to it in the risk and fraud sector, where we definitely will have something we can fight and attack in that case. But I'm more than open for questions. I'm more than open for the panel discussions. And that's it from my side, Laura. Hello.
Oops, sorry, trying to get my video back on. So
no, I was paranoid that I lost the connection.
Thank you so much. Now, one quick question. I mean, I think that there's so many things. When I worked at Amazon, we were talking to a lot of automobile companies about embedding the Echo and the Alexa technology within the automobile. But one thing that's really important is voice technology. So how much effort are you putting into making voice be a great authentication method? Is that, what kind of improvements do you see on the horizon there?
As I said before, the thing is, as we're talking about the car, you are not talking with me. It's just the group. It's just Volkswagen himself, where the manufacturer are sitting. So they taking care of the car, but I'm pretty sure they're working with something like that. So I own personally also Volkswagen, which it's also possible combined with a voice payment or with a voice instruction and something like that. What I see, friends of mine, they own a very new car of Volkswagen. It's something you can adopt with a subscription, as other manufacturers also do. So the future, from my point of view, will be in this case some subscription model. So you will buy a car which can be used for everything, but you have to pay over a monthly subscription when you need to use it. For example, if you need a heater on your driver's seat, just for the winter time, you book it just for 3 or 4 months, and then you cancel the subscription. Over the summertime, you don't need the heater, but in the winter time, you book it again. And that will be as we see it in the normal world of electronics. So you buy the big stuff, but you pay the low stuff, and then you adopt what you need.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you very much. Okay, so I think we have about 20 minutes left for Q&A. So I think I've already gotten a few of the questions out there, but I'd like to, you guys can turn your cameras back on. We're just gonna chat, the 6 of us. The first question that all of these changes, when we're thinking about 10 years out, and then these new types of technologies, new ways of paying, it requires a massive shift in the consumer's behavior, their belief systems, their psychology. So thinking about Generation Alpha and Generation Z, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, how do you think our kids are going to be viewing payments differently from those of us who are boomers and Gen X? And I'll start with you, Marcus, thinking of how do you, I don't know if you've done any studies on this, but the generational shifts that will be required to move into the future.
Yeah, not a study per se on this, but there are some views that we can borrow from, kind of innovation theory, for example. I think to start with, common logic would prevail here, and an easy comment would be obviously that people would adopt any kind of innovation that makes their life easier, right? So transaction costs are lower to process a payment, or transacting the real economy to buy a service or a product. So that's what you'll actually use, right? But there is an element of education, there is an element of perception as to how secure processes, how private processes, a lot of these things I think matter a lot more, for our generation, next generation, the previous generations, when they kind of experienced these services or the internet, let's say in the earlier days. But going forward, I think this idea of innovation ecosystems, and again, this comes from anecdotal evidence that, for example, new payment rails and new payment processes, like for example CBDC in China, hasn't been used as much in the context of replacing, for example, WeChat and Alipay. The reason is because there is a much, powerful grip of innovation ecosystems within which it's not just about the payment, but it's also about the value that you consume around the payment, right? So the more embedded the payment is within a process, or the more central payment is in bringing, kind of external potentially, or even internal value, when you interact with it as a system, the more successful it will be, I think. So the winners of the future might be, either kind of creating these kind of super apps where everything is embedded, you have access to tremendous value, from different players, or embedded processes that are very much built into a journey, right? And you also, or you gave some of these examples in the beginning of your presentation. So I think that would be my thought.
Excellent. And anyone else? Stephen, Andre, what do you think about, are kids willing to sell their data for a better customer experience?
From a car manufacturer company view, and from a personal view, I will see that the Generation X is not only changing the payment world, it's also changing the rest of the world. What do I mean with that is, that I see in the future, beside to the stuff of doing payments with this generation, is that that my assumption is that the sharing community will be grow. So in the future, maybe the normal person, let's call it so, will not be buy his own car. He will use a sharing car. So from my point of understanding is that the future will be go that way. And when we're talking about the sharing community, we're also talking about changing the world of payments, because of the people will use different apps. They don't go to a dealer and say, hey, I need to buy a car, make me a finance offer or something like that. They want to walk about the street and thinking, okay, we have to go there. Let's take the car. Okay, we have to use this app, or we have this, you have to use this app. So when we're talking about Ellie, we are on the point where we're creating not a super app, we're creating an app who is using by customer. They don't need to use five different apps to upload his car. So I think that's the way where we walk through the future, that the people from the generation Z and X don't buy a car, change the world of payment, and growing up in a sharing community. My point of view.
Excellent. You know what? Since we have about 10 or 15 minutes left, I would like to have each of you just give me your prediction for 10 years, the next 10 years. So I'm going to probably start with my screen looking at Stephen. What is your prediction? What's the biggest game changer in 10 years?
Well, I'm obviously going to say some sort of implantable technology. I think it's, and well, in my research-wise, experience-wise, looking at tech of the past, I suspect we'll see a lot more around the use of tech, hybridization of humans, implanting all sorts of technology, loads more advancements in brain implants, all sorts of wacky stuff currently. But give it 10, 20 years, I mean, who knows what we'll be doing? And it just seems more convenient, more commonplace. I think that's the biggest prediction. It'll just become normal to do this sort of stuff. So.
Excellent. And I think the fact that you and your employees have all got the chip, got the implants, says so much. So you have to, I think it'll continue to grow. But I love the enthusiasm, and thank you for that prediction. And Andre, let me guess. No.
When we're talking about what happens the last 5 years in payments and digital world, I definitely follow Stephen and Wojciech with the implant stuff. I don't need to say it needs 10 years. I think it will become faster, especially when we're talking about the generation X and Z. What I see as a merchant of combined with our customer, I see not in 10 years, but in a couple of years, more than 2 to 3 years, will be open banking. Very, very secure payment from a merchant perspective, very cheap payment, costs you a couple of cents. It's secure, it's fast, it's not something for fraudsters and something like that. And it's good for subscription and renewal payment, which we do with Ellie and in our apps. When we take a look in the future, I think we will lost, when we're not talking about Germany, we will lost cash money more and more. And we're going to use devices, not the card, use devices to pay. But I definitely follow Stephen and Wojciech. And that's one thing I need to do in a very short future to implement this for myself.
Very good. Okay, now I'm going to put a new ground rule in place. Voltec, you're going to be next, but you can't say implants because that's already been said. So you got to come up with something new. So you got anything else for us?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I'm going to stay silent in terms of the first thing that we discussed, which is implants. I mean, you know my view. But the other thing that I want to emphasize is the integration and expansion and embedded finance, especially. So implants can also be, of course, part of the embedded finance, but as I said, the integration and the backend stuff that is behind the form factor, the physical form factor, I believe it's even more important. If it wasn't for MasterCard and Visa and all these other payment schemes that are actually orchestrating the market, technology would not be able to develop and to emerge in such extreme formats like implants. So we still need a lot of development integrations among the big players, big corporations, including the ones that are building the embedded finance world. And I believe it will go hand to hand, both use cases, which is the form factors like implants and embedded finance thing. That's my prediction.
Quick question for you, Voltec. There was a question in the chat that I didn't address earlier, and that was about when we think about embedded finance in a mobile commerce or e-commerce or metaverse world, how do you authenticate with your chip? Is there going to be a special device in your headset, in your mobile phone, and if you're not there presently?
In terms of the payments, I believe it's as simple as the PIN number. If the payment transaction exceeds a certain amount, depending on the country, of course, it's a different level in Poland, different level in Germany, different level in the UK. You just need to confirm the PIN number. If we go beyond payments and, for example, go for identity, the identity case that you need to prove that you are who you are, I believe that the installations and setting up the profile should be conducted by a trusted entities, such as, for example, in Poland, if you want to set up a government-backed profile, like it's trusted profile literally on the internet, you need to go to the bank and sign the document that you are who you are, and you confirm the profile like that. And I believe it's going to be similar with the implant, that if you want to go to the if you want to set up such a profile and link it with the implant, you need to go to the trusted surgeon or the other clinic that can confirm that you are who you are. And then it's possible actually to add some sensors into the implant so that the device knows that it has been extracted and put into the different body. It's possible to set up such a mechanism. So I believe that's going to be the way forward in terms of anything else than payments that cannot be confirmed with a certain code.
I think also they're looking at trying to understand, like if I'm shopping on Amazon and I have the implant in my finger, then how do I check out?
Oh, you're talking about the online.
Yeah, online. So if I'm online or in the metaverse or anything, like how do I use my finger? We're gonna have to get new hardware.
Well, yeah, of course, it's a near field communication, so you need to have a reader that can read that kind of device. And since it's based on the EMV protocol, which is purely for payments, I believe it's not going to be the way forward. It's multiple other options that you can use for online payments, and implants are going to stay only for the offline channel. And payments in the e-commerce is a totally different topic, totally different technology. I believe it's going to stay there.
Do you agree, Stephen?
Sort of. I mean, there is a route where you could use it as a two-factor sort of authentication, using your mobile phone to tap your hand to then authenticate a like you do with the card reader for the bank. You put in your PIN. You could use a second device to authenticate against your hand, etc., for online transactions. There's a route around all of these potential issues.
Yeah, now we are getting more to the single sign-on options, that the implant can act as a single sign-on second step authorization, and that's okay. But it's not only for payments in this case. If we are talking about the online authorization, we can use the implant as a second step authorization for not only payments, but multiple other identity like checkouts that you may experience in the internet.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. That's a very interesting thing we need to consider, is how do we make it omni-channel?
Just to finish this up, it's already possible. Google actually has this platform that you can set up your own single sign-in option, and you can already use it. Probably all the implants that are available on a online market. So it's doable, but we are just not doing it at all at the moment. We are focused on payments.
Okay, good. And so Marcos, you get the last word, last prediction.
Yeah, I guess, you know, I'm quite positive about not necessarily, you know, at the kind of a point of sale or, you know, kind of a user experience layer with all these kind of technologies that you can initiate potential or identify is that, but also quite positive on the side of the the actual rails and the architecture and the systems that all these interactions or initiations will fit into, right? So what's mentioned that Open Finance, for example, as a new rail, I say as a new rail because it really kind of transforms and goes away from the very traditional kind of card rails we have so far, widely adopted in the West. I think it's quite a positive step. I expect to see a lot of innovation being built on top of it as open data becoming more of a trend. New APIs will enable more interactions with the system, but also going forward, if we are to look at CBDCs as serious contender and with a lot of potential from central banks, and then again I would be quite positive in seeing, for example, new ecosystems emerging from there. And one of the slides I showed, which was from the Bank of England, has really speaks to the heart of these kind of open ecosystems, open innovation kind of ecosystems in finance, with having, for example, a CBDC infrastructure releasing APIs, which again you can build more value propositions on top of it. So more looking at the back end. In the front end, I think the winning technologies or innovations would be the ones that have this identity very much at its core. And it's not necessarily some new gadget or implant, etc. I mean, these are all super positive, but sometimes it's just purely kind of a process innovation development. I mean, the examples you mentioned about invisible payments from Uber, for example, or even I would add here Amazon Go. None of it is any kind of innovation at the payment level. It's just the process that really kind of utilizes sensors and and images and cameras and recognition to build a better experience. So there is a lot of room for innovation there as well. And I think quite ambitious that we'll see some great developments going forward.
Awesome, very good. And I guess I'll leave you with mine as well. And that is that, of course, I'd have to bring up social commerce. We didn't spend too much time on that today, but I'm a big fan of the emergence of the creator economy and the potential for creator monetization through NFTs. So what I like about NFTs is that as a creator, if I'm creating, if I'm developing doing a movie or music or a webinar or a video or whatever it is that I'm creating, I can actually mint an NFT and then put kind of a smart contract in place so that I can get royalties as I sell that NFT into perpetuity. And anyone I can, maybe if I'm creating a movie, I might have 20 people on the staff and they can all get their royalties as well that happen automatically as the number. Like I might mint 10,000 NFTs for that one movie, and then as it sells, as people buy them, they watch and then they sell it. So I think that's an interesting development. And I know that so it's a lot of people think it's smoke and mirrors, but I think that it's a technology that actually does have can solve a problem if we can figure out the right structure. So that's it for me, and I just want to give again a big thank you. I'm going to turn it over to either Emily or Antonia to close out. But thank you guys so much for all of your insights.
Thank you to all our speakers. What a really insightful session. Thank you to everyone that's attended today's webinar, and apologies for the confusion around the slides. Emily has now sent that via the chat, but we will, of course, send via email too. You will receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view a recording of today's webinar, and you'll also be receiving a survey on the webinar. So we would appreciate if you could complete this and provide your feedback. On behalf of the Payments Association and our speakers, thank you for joining us today and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
And happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you, guys.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you, everyone.